I'm Sarah Mueller, a reporter with Forbes. Now, we have a lot to break down because last night was our first RNC debate. I'm here with Professor Tim Hagle from the University of Iowa to talk everything that happened. First of all, I just want to know who do you think came out on top? What do you think was the big takeaway from last night?
The first part of that question, in terms of who came out on top, is always a very, very subjective examination or evaluation. If you like a particular candidate, you probably think he or she did well. If you don't like them, you usually kind of discount it to a certain extent. So it's hard to get any kind of objective measurement. Nevertheless, it did seem that certain people did better than others. And usually that's how it works. It's very rare that you can actually just flat out win a debate like this because they're often just not debating. It's a more matter of, did anybody make a big mistake, or did anybody just do well or do above expectations? And in that regard, you had a few people that did fairly well. DeSantis did well, kind of expectation that some of the other candidates would have gone after him, and they really didn't. So he was out of the fray for the most part, was able to make a number of his fairly strong points, talking about his record in Florida and so forth. Nikki Haley also came on fairly strong and was very energetic and engaged with some of the other people, particularly Ramaswamy. And so she, I think, did well for herself too. Christie, of course, is his basic objective, I guess, in the campaign is to go after Trump. That's what he does. That's what he is accused of in last night's debate as well. And he did that, and he did it very well. And that's one of his strengths, is this kind of a thing. And he basically engaged with Ramaswamy as well. And so even though people aren't probably going to support him for the nomination, at least not here in Iowa, I think he's doing better in New Hampshire, maybe some other places as well, but he probably won't get the nomination. But he still came across fairly well in terms of making the points he wanted to make. Other people perhaps didn't do as well. One of the kind of surprises was Tim Scott, not because he did anything really bad, he just didn't do a whole lot, that he didn't seem to be engaged. He made some good points, as is usually the case, talking about faith and family and opportunity and things of that nature, but he just didn't seem to engage and didn't have as much time as you might have expected. So he didn't hurt himself, but he really didn't help himself, and that was a bit of a surprise. Doug Burgum did okay. He didn't get a lot of time, not surprising given that he was low in the polls, and the folks on the outside of the lineup there tend to not get as much time. But he also got credit for having injured himself, torn his Achilles tendon beforehand, being in the emergency room, and still managed to stand up there for 2 hours. And he seemed a little uncomfortable at times, but you have to give him credit for being there and all, I guess, under those circumstances. A couple of people who didn't do well but really weren't expected to. Asa Hutchinson just didn't come across well. And at one point, he talked about January 6th as an insurrection, which is, from Republicans' point of view, is basically a Democrat's talking point. And he also is one that goes after Trump, but he's just not as good at it as Christie. And basically, I wouldn't even expect Hutchinson to make the second debate. We'll have to see if he does resonate to a certain extent. And so, in that regard, he's probably out of it at this point. Well, one of the people that seemed to get a lot of attention, and according to some polls or something this morning, Vivek Ramaswamy got a lot of attention and seemed to please a lot of people. Very, very talkative on stage, engaged with a lot of people. The problem is that he got called on his stuff. That basically, in terms of the candidates that were attacking others on the stage, they mostly were going after Ramaswamy. Now, he kind of expected that before the debate occurred. There was some suggestion that because he seemed to have some momentum, was rising a bit in the polls, which is why he was located right next to DeSantis as sort of the second spot, that people would come after him. And they did. But he also brought it on himself to a certain extent, that he came across as one report indicated, kind of smart alecky. And I think he had talked about at some point how he had been bullied in school. And I actually got the impression that he's kind of that smart aleck kid that's really smart, knows a lot, but sort of haunts some of the other people, like the jocks, who then throw him in a locker. So he's kind of came across as that a little bit. And another sort of phrase that I was thinking of is, in Texas, they'll sometimes say, is a person that's all hat and no cattle, that he seemed kind of superficial. And in fact, at one point, he talked about how he didn't have a lot of foreign policy experience. And Haley even called him on that basically suggesting that Ramaswamy was saying things that he really didn't understand, changing his position, things of that nature. But, some people like that. And so it maybe came across as being the favorite or the person who won, put that in quotation marks, the debate in terms of a lot of people. So that's kind of the short breakdown of how things seemed to go last night for the most part, at least in my view.